Shalom, shalom, family. Welcome to the D.C.B channel. My name is Uzi Alewi. I'm one of the teachers of Congregation D.C.B, CHOKMAH, BINAH, which stands for the House of Knowledge, Wisdom, and Understanding. Welcoming you on this Wednesday evening. Today's date is April 6th on the Gregorian calendar, and we're here today because Pesach is upon us. Next week on the Shabbat will be or right before the Shabbat day will be the season of Pesach, going into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And we just want for all newcomers and for people that might have forgotten certain things, just to refresh you on the do's and don'ts of Pesach or Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. As we do customarily every year, my brother Rabbi Chief Binyamin goes over a list of things. He takes questions, and at this time, I will turn it over to my brother Rabbi Chief Binyamin so that he could proceed. Also, if you give me a second, Rabbi, let me see if I could get this on. I don't know if I could get it on Facebook. I'm going to try to get it on Facebook and see if I could stream it there. That way we could have a couple of places where we could stream from. All right. Let me see here. Let's see if it works. I haven't done the Facebook thing in a while, so hopefully this will work and we could work it out. So yes, like I was saying, every year we go through the do's and don'ts of Pesach, and you know, at this time, I haven't done the Facebook thing in a while, so it sounds perfect. So at this time, without any further ado, I'll turn it over to my brother Rabbi Chief Binyamin. How are you, Rabbi?
Shalom to you, shalom to everybody. Praise and honor to the Most High. Thanking Jehovah for all of our lives. Thanking for strength and good health, and blessing us once again with this opportunity to call upon His name and even reach the season that we are about to get into. It's the season of our deliverance. So we definitely want to enjoy the season as we start to approach it, as well as we start to prepare for it. We just want to thank the Most High for this opportunity that He has given us to once again even discuss these matters, discuss the topic of Passover, discuss the topic of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and just praying at this time that the Most High Jehovah God will be with us as we continue to have these discussions. Prayerfully, we don't have to keep having these discussions in the land of captivity. Just unfortunately that we are here, scattered throughout the earth, and we have to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread wherever we dwell. And there are statutes that are part of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we just thank the Most High even just for knowing of this season and being able to get into it. So once again, we're just going to have a discussion on Passover, a discussion on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, take some questions as well as comments. We're all learning. No matter what, whether we feel that we've been here, for 1 year or 40 years or 60 years or whatever it is, we're still learning. We're just praying that the Most High will forgive us for the mistakes that we have made, and that He will help us along the way to not, make greater mistakes in the future. So at this time, as we are having this discussion, also just bearing in mind for everyone that, as we are having this discussion, it's going to be basically how it is taught at Congregation CHOKMAH BINAH. We do know and are mindful that there are various congregations of various communities that observe Passover, observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread different ways. We are mindful that of the customs that take place once again amongst the various communities and congregations. So as we're going through this discussion, we're speaking about it from the point of view of how it is taught at this congregation, and primarily even, well, not just primarily, but beyond that, just going as close to the scripture as possible, because we want to make sure that we don't offend the Most High in any manner. We want to make sure that we don't transgress his law in any way. So as we continue to go through this discussion, just praying that the Most High would bless us, that he would give us proper knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, so that once again, we would not transgress his word. So as we will begin our discussion, we're basically going to start off with a document that we go through every year. And the document will most likely be placed at some point in the description of this video, so people can download the document. The document just gives a background of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then goes into a discussion of the ingredients or the things that we are supposed to look out for, during this time. So once again, the document is available on the website for Beit D.C.B, www.beitdcb.org. So the document that we're going to be going to will be available there. And once again, at some point, as you read the description and also as well as the comments for this video, a link for this document will be placed there as well. So once again, we're going to begin our discussion talking about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So Passover is an appointed season which the children of Yisrael are commanded to observe every year on the 14th day of the first month on the Hebrew calendar at dusk. So, turning over to Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5, where it says, well, starting from 4, actually, these are the appointed seasons of Yahweh, even holy convocations, which he shall proclaim in their appointed season. And then in verse 5, it says, in the first month on the 14th day of the month at dusk is Yahweh's Passover. So we have been commanded as the children of Israel to observe this season. But the season the Passover season does include a offering. We'll discuss that later on. And it does include an offering. So when we're talking about observing the Passover, we know that we cannot do the offering, but we acknowledge the time of the 14th day of the first month. And once again, that's on the Hebrew calendar, which is a lunar solar calendar. It's based on the cycle of the moon. That's how the months are determined on the Hebrew calendar. And even at that time, all throughout the world, we were dwelling in Egypt. Months were determined by the cycle of the moon. So when there was a new moon, there was a new month. It was just that in the month that the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, then that was specified to the children of Israel as the beginning of months. But once again, as we follow a solar or lunar solar calendar, the months are determined by the new moon. The beginning of months, the beginning of each month is based on the new moon. And once again, the entire year is based on the solar year to keep everything in season. So once again, Passover itself, or the sacrifice that would take place on the 14th day of the first month at dusk. And then this month is called Abib. The first month of the year for the children of Israel is called Abib. For instance, we could read in Exodus chapter 13, verse 4. And actually, once again, just going back another verse, Exodus chapter 13, verse 3, and Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand, Yahweh brought you out from this place. There shall be no leavened bread eaten. And then verse 4 goes on to say, this day you go forth in the month of Abib. So just to give an explanation that the first month on the Hebrew calendar is called Abib, based on scripture. Also, once again, in Exodus chapter 23, verse 15, you'll see the month called Abib. Also in Exodus chapter 34, verse 18, and in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 1, those are the places where you'll see that the first month of the Hebrew calendar, or the first month of the year that Jehovah God gave to the children of Israel, is called Abib. And then it goes on, as we read in the document, that it is the beginning of months under the children of Israel. So when we go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, it says, speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, now going back to, so I read the wrong verse, but actually we'll go back to verse 1, Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. And Jehovah spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, and then in verse 2, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months, it shall be the first month of the year to you. So Abib is the beginning of months to the children of Israel. Then immediately following Passover, because once again, the Passover season is on the 14th day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar at dusk. Immediately following that is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which begins on the 15th day of Abib, the 15th day of the first month on the Hebrew calendar, and it lasts for 7 days, and it concludes on the 21st day of the month of Abib. So both Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread commemorate the first Passover in Egypt and the subsequent exodus from Egypt. Now, Passover was the night that God passed over Egypt, slaying all firstborn from man to beast. And the service which is to be held regarding the lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs serves as a memorial of the events surrounding the Passover in Egypt. And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which follows, is a reminder that the children of Israel left Egypt in haste, insomuch that they were not able to allow their bread to rise, and ate unleavened bread during the initial stages of the Exodus. And then you can read about that entire Exodus experience in Exodus chapters 11 through 13. But going back, of course, to the beginning of the book of Exodus, it talks about the stay of the children of Israel in Egypt. We went there as 70 souls as we migrated in the time of our father Yaakov. And in the book of Exodus talks about how we grew and how we were eventually enslaved by the Egyptians and placed under harsh bondage. And then Jehovah God sent Moses to speak to Pharaoh, to tell the children of Israel, to tell Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. So this entire season that we're talking about is basically a joyous occasion. It connects us with God. And for the children of Israel is the birth of our nation. And when you read about the entire thing that took place, or the entire series of events that took place in Exodus chapter 12, once again, that was the final sign or the final plague, because we all hear about the 10 plagues that God put upon Egypt. The slaying of the firstborn of man and beast was basically the final plague. And this was what caused our immediate departure out of the land of Egypt, where Pharaoh came and told Moses, told Aaron, told all the children of Israel to get out of the land after the firstborn of man and beast were slayed by Jehovah God that night. So now with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, there come certain laws. And these laws include no eating anything leavened. So this is leavened bread, leavened cakes, or any other baked goods, cookies, crackers, anything like that contains any form of leavening. And we have to remove leavening from our homes, before those 7 days come in for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We have to make sure that all leavening is removed from our homes. So turning over to Exodus chapter 12, verse 15, where it says, 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Howbeit the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Yisrael. And as we're talking about the discussion of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, verse 16 says, and in the first day there shall be to you a holy convocation, and in the 7th day a holy convocation. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. that only may be done by you. So that was read just to make the correlation that for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is known as CHOKMAH in Hebrew, that the first day is a holy day and the seventh day is a holy day. So in total, it's a 7-day feast, but the first day is the seventh day and the seventh day is a holy day. And as Chief Uziel just mentioned, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread would actually fall on Shabbat for this year. So it was, it was already holy, and once again, it's falling on the Shabbat, so it's going to be holy. But the seventh day is actually going to fall before the following Shabbat. So on the following week, there'll be the holy day, which is the seventh day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then the Shabbat day, or the Sabbath day, which will be coming in after that. And in verse 17, it says, "And you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for in this self-same day have I brought your host out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day throughout your generations by an ordinance forever." So regardless of where we dwell around the earth, as it mentioned in verse 17, we are to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're not able to observe the actual Passover sacrifice because we can't do sacrifices except we're in the place that Jehovah God has chosen for his name to be called. And unless we have the priests out of the line of Aaron in their position to perform the offerings, we do not do offerings in captivity, or we do not do offerings in any of the lands that we are dwelling in outside of the land of Israel. And even in the land of Israel, it would only be in the specified place, which eventually became Jerusalem. But as once again, it says in verse 17, "And you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for in the self-same day have I brought your host out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day throughout your generations by an ordinance forever." So even without the offerings, because the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread has offerings as well, but we are commanded by God to observe this feast in every generation, as it says here, for an ordinance forever. Then it goes into verse 18, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eats that which is leavened, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Yisrael, whether he be a sojourner or one that is born in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all of your habitations shall you eat unleavened bread." So what was just read in verse 20 of Exodus chapter 12, and going back to verse 15, where it talks about leaven has to be put out of our houses, and we cannot eat leavened bread for those 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it's mentioned twice that whoever eats leavened bread will be cut off from among the children of Israel. So it's important for us to discuss and to know what leavening is. So by definition, leavening is basically an ingredient that ferments dough or ferments grain. And we read it in two of those verses, in Exodus chapter 12, verse 15, and in Exodus chapter 12, verse 19. In the Hebrew is the term so'or. And so'or it actually means sourdough and can refer to yeast as well, or basically any agent that is used to make bread rise. So leaven, or so'or as the word is in Hebrew, is an ingredient that causes bread to rise, causes dough to ferment, or causes any type of grain to ferment. And the word so'or occurs 5 times in the Holy Scriptures, twice in the verses we just read, Exodus 12, verse 15, and Exodus 12, verse 19. It's also in Exodus 13, verse 7. And we'll read that one as well, because once again, as we're talking about what we're supposed to be removing from our homes, actually we'll start from Exodus chapter 13, verse 6, where it says, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast to Jehovah. And verse 7 says, unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all of thy borders. And we'll talk about no leaven being seen with thee in all our borders later on as well. But that verse 7 of Exodus chapter 13 is one of the verses that has the word or has the word leaven. Then also in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 11, and Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 4. And in all of those verses, those are once again the 5 times that the word or the actual word leaven occurs in the Holy Scriptures. It's all in connection with bread. So in ancient times, and even today, but definitely in ancient times, it was discovered primarily history shows in Egypt that the process for making leavened bread was using sourdough. And as time went on, the discovery of yeast or yeast cells and commercializing yeast, because the way you have your your baker's yeast that you actually could get in the packets or the cans, that became a process that came along later on. And barm is also an ingredient that is used to cause that fermentation process in dough or the fermentation process for grain to make the leavened bread. But we read throughout scripture and just known through history, people ate a lot of unleavened bread. But at some point, there was the process of leavened bread that came into play. And so once again, or is referring to the actual ingredient. Literally, for the purpose of this discussion, just making sure that we say literally that or is actually referring to sourdough. But being that we read, twice already, or actually 3 times already, that we're not allowed to eat any leavened bread throughout the 7 days of the Feast of Leavened Bread, we have to make sure that we remove any ingredient that would cause dough to rise or cause dough to ferment, cause grain to ferment. So once again, along with the sourdough, we also make sure that we don't have barm or yeast in our possession. Now, there's another word in Hebrew called chametz, which means leavened bread as a noun. The word chametz also appears as a verb in various places in the Holy Scriptures, but in the purposes of what we've been reading, the word chametz as a noun means leavened bread. So going back to Exodus chapter 12 once again, which is one of the first places where the word chametz appears, where it says 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Howbeit the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Yisrael. So where you see the 2 words leavened bread, that's the word chametz in Hebrew. And then also in Exodus chapter 13, verse 3, and Moses said unto the people, remember this day. This is after we came out of the land of Egypt, and we're on our way. We didn't get to the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds yet, but as we're coming out, Moses is telling the children of Israel. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand, Jehovah brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. So once again, and then as we read earlier, this day you go forth in the month of Abib. That's Exodus 13, verse 4, where once again, the first month of the Hebrew calendar is Abib. So where it mentioned, shall no leavened bread be eaten, that's the word chametz. And that's basically when you actually have dough from any grain, and you add leavening or soor, which is the word in Hebrew. The result is leavened bread, or chametz is the word for Hebrew in the Hebrew language for leavened bread. So you'll read about that as we just read in Exodus chapter 12, verse 15, and then what we just read in Exodus chapter 13, verse 3. And also in, dropping down to Exodus 13, verse 7, it mentions that unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days. There shall no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all of thy borders, which I know we just read not too long ago, but where it mentioned no leavened bread shall be seen with thee, once again, that's the word chametz, so that's leavened bread. And the verse before that, once again, just reading that again, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and then the 7th day shall be a feast to Jehovah. So just encapsulating everything all together, and then the word chametz as a noun appears in Exodus chapter 23, verse 18, and Exodus chapter 34, verse 25, also speaking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the word chametz once again appears in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 11, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 17, Leviticus chapter 7, verse 13, Leviticus chapter 23, verse 17, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3, and Amos chapter 4, verse 5. And all of those places that were just mentioned, which are 11 locations, they're all in connection with bread. You know, when you read all of those verses, they're all in connection with bread in some shape or form. And as we go on, so putting everything together and how we teach it at this congregation, based on upon God's laws and the state of modern processes, CHOKMAH BINAH teaches its members to eat only fresh foods and ground foods during this season. Now, as a precaution, and once again, utilizing the term precaution, and once again, this is something that is taught at our congregation. Once again, when we utilize the term precaution, we're not saying that the law prohibits or allows, you know, certain things. When we mention words such as precaution, mention words such as opinion, but we just have to be safe and be meticulous in the things that we're doing. Because of course, you know, we're buying foods from companies that do have leaven, that do have the ingredients that we're not supposed to eat within their same factories. There are things such as ingredients that the things that may be done in the process of making certain things that may not be listed in the ingredients, such as when you buy any type of product, you know, you read the ingredients, but then there's a side note that says this was manufactured in a facility that processes peanuts or, you know, soy or you know, grain or different things. Even though those specific things are not mentioned in the list of ingredients for the product that you're buying, they give you the warning that it's processed in that same facility. So therefore, if you have a certain allergic, you know, certain allergy for those things, it's just letting you know up front, it was processed around those things. So even though the ingredient is not in there, it was processed around there. So some trace elements may actually appear in it. So we have to apply the same rules for the Feast of Unleavened Bread because we want to make sure that we don't transgress the word of God. So we focus on eating fresh foods and ground foods, you know, doing a lot of cooking from scratch, staying away from restaurants. You know, even though you might be go to a restaurant, buying something that is specific for the Feast of Unleavened Bread that you feel that it's okay to eat, but you have other things in that same restaurant that is, you know, outlawed for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Just like how we would treat clean food versus unclean food, you know, not going to restaurants that serve unclean food, even if you go in there to buy clean foods. So during this time of Feast of Unleavened Bread, we just have to be extra cautious and making sure that we stay away to restaurants, and we'll be buying things, you know, reading the ingredients. There's a list of ingredients that is in the document that can be downloaded. You know, it may seem like a long list, but the primary items that we're saying to avoid are, you know, baker's yeast, baking powder, you know, baking soda, balm, any type of yeast such as brewer's yeast as well, any type of ale. You know, beer itself is actually fermented grain. So beer is not something that you would want to have in your homes or in your borders during this time. Because once again, when we read back in Exodus chapter 13, verse 7, and it said, neither shall there be leaven seen within in all thy borders. That's basically anything that belongs to you. So you can't have leaven in your house or anything that is considered your borders, anything that's considered your property. So when we're speaking about the list that's in the document of the things that you have to remove from your home during this time, it's not difficult to do. It's not something that, you know, we usually do these discussions, you know, within the 2 weeks, or as close to 2 weeks as possible before the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. So that way, as people are cleaning their homes, preparing their homes for this time, that they would have the list. And, you know, once again, these ingredients, you want to make sure that you check your toothpaste, you know, check your deodorants, check any type of cosmetic products, check any type of products that, you know, you have in your home, whether it's for consumption or whether it's just for application of your body, you know, lotions or anything like that. You want to make sure that these ingredients Um, definitely any form of yeast, any form of baking powder or baking soda, also known as sodium bicarbonate, or ammonium bicarbonate. These things are not, in your home for these 7 days. And once again, the primary thing to avoid eating during the 7 days is eating any form of leavened bread. So that's any form of bread that is made, or any type of baked goods that is made with sourdough, made with yeast, or made with baking powder, or made with balm. These are the things that you definitely want to make sure that you are not doing, or that do not have in your home during this time. So once again, just we thank the Most High God, thanking Jehovah God, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth. Is him that we're trying to please, because he's the one that gives these the commandments to follow. In the beginning, when we read the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that is the God that we serve. So when he gives us the instructions, and he has a direct connection with the children of Yisrael, especially as he brought us out of the land of Egypt, based on what he spoke to our father Abraham generations prior to that, and he fulfilled that promise, even though Abraham was not alive. But it's our responsibility as we are alive to fulfill our promise to Jehovah God, and making sure that we keep his commandments, statutes, and judgments, and definitely observing this season that we are in. And by doing so, once again, it's not a difficult season to comply with, but it's definitely a season that we have to make sure that we just are meticulous and careful in. So once again, just thanking the Most High God. And at this time, if people have questions, we'll do what we can to answer the questions. Also, once again, just bearing in mind that we're speaking from the point of view of this congregation. I know, well, they are the congregation, the communities, as we mentioned earlier, that especially when it comes to what is leaven and what is not leaven, have differences on how we teach it. But as we teach it is, what we try to do is teach it as close to the written Holy Scripture as possible, and not adding anything to it. So no leavened bread during the season, which is, once again, just sounds repetitive, but doing this, Lord, there's a lot of repetition. We have to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread every year. So once again, whether we've been in this for 1 year or 60 years, we have to make sure that we read and study it, understand it. And that will help us to avoid any type of mistakes, especially during the season. So once again, if anybody has any questions, we can get
Rabbi, can you hear
that
me?
at this time.
I don't think you can hear
for
me.
those, I know it's definitely streaming on YouTube. And
can you hear me?
For those that, if it's streaming on Facebook, they may have their questions as well. And once again, people can post that. I don't know if there were any questions, because we did start to speak about this on the Sabbath day that just passed, even though we didn't take any questions at that time. But there may have been some questions that were put in the chat, and we could answer those as well. So once again, we just want to make sure that we cover as much as possible and cover as much detail as possible for this time. Hallelujah.
Shalom, Rabbi. Shalom, shalom. Rabbi.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I was calling out to you for a little while. Okay.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just going, and I had, just because I was reading the stuff, and I just had everything else on mute. So
yeah, I was trying to tell you that I had the list up. At least the last page, I had it up. So
because I was looking at the YouTube screen, so I saw when you had that up there.
It's Matt Smith asks, you cannot leave the house during Passover? It's a question whether or not you can leave the house during Passover.
No, you can leave your house. Oh no, the Passover. Specifically, I was actually about to get into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But once again, the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover are two different things. So the Passover that took place in Egypt, what is known to us as the first Passover, we were not supposed to leave our homes until we were instructed to, which was after Jehovah God passed over Egypt, and the firstborn of man and beast was slain. So we were commanded at that time to roast the Passover lamb or goat on the 14th day at dusk, which is, a good amount of time before sundown to where that animal could be roasted. And then the animal will be, once it's roasted, and of course they ate the entire animal, and whatever was left will be burned in the morning. But they brought that into the house, and wherever they ate that animal, that's the house that they had to stay in for that night until the instructions were given that they would be leaving in the morning. So that took place at that time. Today, um, we could leave our homes. Once again, the Passover is actually referring to the sacrifice itself. In the very first Passover, once again in Egypt, the word Passover or Pesach, as it is in Hebrew, refers to the time that Jehovah God passed over Egypt. It also refers to the animal that was sacrificed or the animal that was roasted and we ate at that time. But afterwards, when they talk about Passover or Pesach, it's talking actually about the animal. So we can leave our homes during Passover. But I know that there are customs that mirror there were customs among various congregations that mirror what took place in Egypt. So when there's a Passover service that night, people generally stay within their congregation or stay within their home if they're doing Passover service, the prayers and everything at home until after midnight. So we are aware of those customs, but just going by the law, you today you could leave your home. I think that's the only question that was up there on the YouTube. I don't know if any questions. If it's on Facebook, I don't know if there are any questions there.
I don't see any other questions up here right now, Rabbi.
Okay.
So.
And once again, just going back into the actual Passover itself, Passover, the offering itself. The offering, once again, cannot be done anywhere that we want to, in the various, cannot be done, as we are scattered in captivity. So when we refer to Passover, we are specifically referring to the offering. So I know there's also, we're also aware of congregations that say that we're not supposed to observe Passover outside of the land, which in essence is true. What we are observing is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as we read earlier, is supposed to be kept in all generations. So we keep that 7-day feast, keeping the first day holy and keeping the seventh day holy, as we're instructed in the book of Exodus in all of our generations as an ordinance forever. Once again, going back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 17.
What are some examples of some of the products that we could use during the season of a Feast of Unleavened Bread, being that we have to eliminate the leavening out the midst of us? Can you give some examples of some like toothpaste, soaps, the essentials, the things
Right.
that we are able to put on? Because most deodorant has like baking soda on it or sodium bicarbonate. Yeah. So are there any examples of things that we could use?
I mean, outside of going to like a health food store or some of the bigger stores like, the Whole Foods and Fairway, if you're shopping at a regular store, I mean, Tom's of Maine is still, is available in regular stores. And you still have to read the ingredients for each of their items. But there's a bulk of their items that do not contain the baking soda. And once again, you have to be very careful when reading the ingredients because you may pick up a Tom's of Maine toothpaste of a specific flavor, and one flavor may have baking soda and the other one may not. So just making sure that not looking at the front panel, but just looking at the ingredients itself and the ingredients that are in the document and also that was posted earlier. Those specifically are the ingredients that you're looking for. But in terms of speaking of a company, in terms of toothpaste and deodorants, Tom's of Maine that you could get generally outside in various stores. Tom's of Maine is a company that has a line of products that do not contain those ingredients.
What about the soaps?
Soaps in general, we specify that you have to be careful about the soaps, but most soaps actually do not have those ingredients in them. So you pretty much in terms of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you're pretty safe with a variety of lines of soaps. Of course, just going to more of the natural soaps from a health food store would help. But this is not the season, especially during this time where prices are high for a lot of things. But it's not a season where you necessarily feel or should feel that you have to spend a lot when it comes to deodorants and toothpaste and soaps and things like that. So generally, there are a myriad of companies out there that would be just too much to name that don't have these items in it. Now, soaps, you just have to be careful of year round because they may contain fat from unclean animals. So that would just you have to be careful of your soaps just year round. But when it comes to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, not too many of the companies are using these prohibited products for Feast of Unleavened Bread in their soaps.
Usually usually for the soaps we use peppermint soap. I believe it's called Bronner's peppermint soap, or
Yeah,
they got
yeah,
different.
yeah, liquid
They got
soap.
different. Yeah, they got different. They got different things. They got eucalyptus. They got it's a bunch of different things that they have, but it's basically a liquid. It's a liquid soap that's all natural. You can find it in the health food store and in regular stores now, I believe, like beauty and health stores. They sell the Bronner's soaps. You could pick that up from there. And what's the other one? I think it's Dr. Bronner's, and there's another brand that makes the liquid soaps. That's usually what we use. What about something like cheese and pasta?
Okay, so for cheese and pastas, we'll start with the reverse. Start with pastas. Definitely want to get rid of those from your homes before the Feast of Unleavened Bread comes in, because basically, just for the sake of much safety, even though the ingredients itself may not have yeast or certain things, it is a grain product that was basically left aside. So when you think about sourdough, the process of sourdough, it doesn't, the process of sourdough is not something that happened very fast. It is a process that takes a while to have the dough sour that you can use as an agent to add to another batch of dough to make bread rise. So when it comes to pastas, you want to make sure that if you do have any pastas in your home at this time, you want to get rid of that before the Feast of Unleavened Bread comes in. Um, Cheese overall, and once again, speaking from the point of view of our congregation and speaking in terms of, Torah or the written law itself, cheese by definition would be okay for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. However, our congregation stays away from it because, we're not privy to the process that each individual company may go through in order to make cheese. So being that, the Feast of Unleavened Bread lasts 7 days, our precaution is to stay away from cheese, from any company for those 7 days. Now, if somebody, makes their own cheese, or they know of a company that where they know for sure that there is no type of any of these leavening agents introduced into the process of it, because some cheese companies do on some level where it may not be in the ingredients, but some cheese companies do on some level use some of the ingredients that are considered leavening in their cheese making process. But the safest thing to do is just to stay away from cheese for the 7 days. So just speaking about cheese on that level, that cheese itself is not prohibited for the Feast of Unleavened Bread based on all of the scriptures that we read and referenced. But because we don't control the process of making cheese today, the best thing to do is to stay away from cheese. But going back to the pastas will be out because that's a leftover grain product.
Another question: is fermentation, is anything that's been fermented, is that prohibited? Or is the process of fermentation in any of our foods, is that prohibited for us to eat or to drink?
So the fermentation that is prohibited during the time is fermented grain. Is not fermentation as a blanket word. So when it comes to fermented grain, which once again goes into the breads, the cakes, the cookies, the crackers, and the fermented grain, when it results in beer, those things are prohibited for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But fermentation overall, is, as a blanket statement or a blanket word, is not prohibited during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that goes into the conversation such as wine and vinegar and ciders. So based on Torah, once again, based on the law, things such as wine, vinegar, and ciders are not prohibited for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But now going back into, we are not, as a whole, as a community, or as a nation at large, we are not. Of course, there are individuals that do within the nation, but we as a whole do not make our own wines. We don't make our own vinegars. We don't make our own ciders, etc. And in the making of those things, many companies actually do introduce yeast to aid, or in some cases speed up, the fermentation process of the wines and vinegars and the ciders. So therefore, our congregation refrains from that. Now, there are various congregations, even much more, there are much more than less, that actually do use vinegar and wine on a larger scale. For our congregation, when it comes to wine, the teaching is to basically go for what is known as the kosher for Passover line, kosher for Passover wines, or the kosher for Passover yayin being the Hebrew word for wine, or the kosher le Pesach wines. Pesach, of course, being Passover. So our congregation teaches that if you're going to be drinking wine, that those would be the wines you go for that specify on it kosher for Passover. But once again, and because what they assert, once again, what they are asserting is that they don't introduce yeast into the process of them making wine. So therefore, it would be okay for those wines to be utilized for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But in general, there is no prohibition as is written for prohibition for wine and vinegar and cider. But once again, that's just the precautions that our congregation take. But once again, there's actually more congregations than less that have wine and vinegar all throughout. And literally, once again, there's nothing that we can say that based on scripture that they are wrong for doing so. We're just doing a lot of precautions, especially from one of the previous questions in terms of pastas and cheeses, and now this one with the vinegars and the wines and things like that, because we don't control the process of everything. We're not in those factories. We don't know what's in the air, so to speak, in those factories, or what's next to those things in the factories. And for 7 days, we want to make sure that we do the best that we can so we don't sin before God. Once again, sin is just a mistake, but those sins could cause us to be cut off. So we want to make sure that we do the best that we can to make sure that we refrain from those things during this time. But once again, leading back to the general question, fermentation as a whole is not prohibited during the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
So the next question will be, isn't yeast a natural occurring process, period, within the atmosphere? There's yeast particles all over. So how is that? You could never get rid of yeast.
Right. In general terms, you can't get rid of yeast. So that's why when we mentioned it earlier, that the word sa'or, or the word sa'or as it's translated to leaven, is literally sourdough. That's the main ingredient, because that's what was used to make leavened bread. Today, we attach the word yeast. When we're attaching the word yeast, we're not talking about naturally occurring yeast. We're talking about the commercial yeast, or the packaged yeast, or the cultivated yeast that is cultivated, that is grown, or that is packaged to be a leavening agent that people can actually use or add to their dough to make it rise. So that's why yeast, in terms of baker's yeast or the packaged yeast or the commercial yeast, is what is prohibited during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But once again, just connecting it with scripture and just connecting with how bread was actually made. Yeah, like you just mentioned, yeast is naturally occurring. The process of making sourdough is so that that dough that is left over is left out with enough time for yeast to cultivate on it. Because it's actually the yeast itself, the yeast spores itself, that causes the fermentation of the grain. And sourdough is actually basically a host for yeast and allows it, as you leave it, the longer you leave it, the more yeast gets cultivated on the sourdough, so that depending on how long you leave the sourdough out, that determines the texture of the leavened bread when it's time to be made. So that's, once again, in regards to yeast. So that's why, we always are careful in explaining that part, because the seor, or the leaven, is literally talking about the sourdough. But because the cutting off process is anybody that eats leavened bread, we have to add balm and we have to add yeast in connection with talking about sourdough and that entire process.
So is it a period of time that I should eat my food between not me making it and it being on the table and me eating it? Is there a period of time, or can I eat leftovers? Can I put food in the refrigerator?
Streaming though.
Yeah, we still streaming.
Okay.
I'm just refreshing it now. Sorry, family. We lost some internet connection over here. So someone wrote, I want to say something important. I'm a Lebanese Jew, and when I'm not in Israel, I'm buying my food by the Hasidic community as they import kosher food from Israel and are careful on this topic.
Which is, once again, which is fine as well. But also dealing with the Hasidic, or the Jewish community as a whole, how they may observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread is not necessarily how we may observe it, because there were various products that they would use during this time that, once again, going by the letter of the law, is not prohibited, but once again, for our precautions and not being able to control how those things are made, we stay away from them. So, for instance, cheese was mentioned. Also, we'll mention chocolate now. There's nothing wrong with chocolate for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But, if we're not in the chocolate making factory, we're not in the chocolate making business, and you are not sure what is done in the factory or the same manufacturing plant of the chocolate that is being made, because once again, it's not, the cocoa doesn't end, it doesn't start as the way as it ends. So there's a process to a lot of things that we eat. So that's why, in general, we do stay away from processed foods. So that would include the chocolates and, various of the, a lot of the chips that we eat, a lot of the snacks that we eat, we have to be careful of as well. So even though the ingredients may not say, may not have any of the things on the list of ingredients, the fact that we're not in the plants or the factories may have other products that are prohibited during the Feast of Unleavened Bread or made around it, we stay away from those things. So, the comment is definitely, it has a lot of merit, because definitely the Hasidic community is definitely going to try to be meticulous, but especially for in reference to our discussion, we make sure that we stay with and stick to the fresh foods and the cooked foods during this time. Fresh fruits and vegetables will always work. Cooking your own food, once again, from scratch will always work. And staying away from all of those processed foods during the 7 days will also work, because that would minimize the opportunity for error.
Also, family, this is the time where we could Well, we learn how to do certain things. We learn how to make matzah, which is really a simple process. It's just flour, water, a little bit of salt. Some people choose to put a little dash of sugar on it. You need that dough without putting baking powder or yeast in it. You need it, and you roll it out. Or they even sell these cast iron, which my wife bought last year. These cast iron is really made for tortillas.
The pans.
Yeah, the pans.
Flat pans, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cast iron, but no, what they do is instead of you rolling it out with a pin, you just take a piece of the dough, you put it in the middle of this cast iron thing, and then you squash it down, and it makes it a perfect flat bread, and boom, you throw it right into a cast iron pan with a little bit of oil at the bottom. People, put olive oil at the bottom of it. Or they just might put it just like that. I put a little bit of olive oil, and literally about 1 minute on one side, a minute on the other side, and it's done. You got fresh bread, fresh unleavened bread. Every time you want it, you just make the dough, and you make your own fresh unleavened bread. And we also eat the crackers that they sell. We don't.
Well, just to clarify, crackers, you talk about the matzo, not the, right, not crackers that you just buy in the store.
No. It's the matzo crackers.
Right.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
The matzo crackers, so.
And not the saltines or even the ones without the salt, right? Because
the matzo cracker is just flour,
right,
water, and salt, I believe. If they even put salt, I believe they put salt in it, so that's all the matzo cracker is. So, yeah, those are things that we do eat during this season and during this time.
And just going back, and this is mentioned, this is one of the verses that was mentioned in the document in regards to seor and chametz, or leavening and leavened bread. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 11, which says, "No meal offering which you shall bring unto Yahweh shall be made with leaven." So leaven is the seor. "For you shall make no leaven nor honey smoke as an offering made by fire unto Yahweh." So now, if the meal offerings that are presented to Yahweh cannot contain any leaven or leavening, we're going to get into discussion of, there were categories of meal offerings that were mentioned in Leviticus chapter 2. So it mentions in verse 4, "And when thou bringest a meal offering baked in an oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil." So that's in verse 4. Verse 5, Leviticus chapter 2, verse 5. "And if thy offering be a meal offering baked on a griddle, it shall be of fine flour unleavened, mingled with oil. Thou shalt break it in pieces and pour oil upon it. It is a meal offering." Verse 7, Leviticus chapter 2, verse 7. "And if thy meal offering be a meal offering in a stewing pan, it shall be made."
I don't know what's happening.
Various ways to make unleavened bread based on Leviticus 2, chapter 2. In the oven, in the griddle, which you just mentioned, and the stewing pan, which is dumplings.
Right.
Or a frying pan as well. People make bakes.
Right.
Or some people call it fry bakes.
Right.
So there's various ways that you can make your unleavened bread, or your unleavened wafers, as it also mentions in various verses. So, once it's a grain product that doesn't have any of those leavening agents in it, you can eat it. But once it has any introduction of leavening in it, that is prohibited for those 7 days.
Can we eat eggs, beans, rice during this time?
Yeah, because none of those are leavening agents. None of those are fermented grains. The concept of beans and rice or not eating beans and rice is actually Ashkenazi by invention, so to speak. And that was just one of their prohibitions. I mean, even, they acknowledged that it was not something that was based on Torah, but it was just one of their prohibitions, because when you grind beans and rice. You can actually make flour out of those things. So their protection or their precaution was not to eat rice and beans and various grains. And collectively, those terms are called quitniot. So you know, you know, anybody out there can do when you do research on quitniot, you'll see the categories of things that were added. Any type of legumes, once again, the beans, the rice, the peas, lentils, different things like that. Amongst the Ashkenazi denomination of Judaism, they prohibited those things during the Feast of Unleavened Bread as their precaution or as their prevention of eating anything leavened. But they, once again, even in their discussion of it, they clearly define that it's not leavening, and that is something that they did. Various Ashkenazi and Orthodox communities in the past 10 years or so have since rescinded that law, that halakhic law that they had. And now, amongst some of the Orthodox and Ashkenazi, they do eat beans and peas and lentils and rice during this time. Or seeds seeds were also included on their list when it came to that. And I know that filtered over into the Israelite community, especially those of us, and I know still is, those of us that were awakened to this way of life and having, for lack of a better term, just having Ashkenazi or Orthodox Jewish people around us to where, we go to their stores, learn from them, whether inadvertently, those of us that were raised around those cultures, whether directly or indirectly, that's how we learned to prohibit those things during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But in general, once again, even with them, they don't prohibit that during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as it stands as leaven, so to speak.
If someone is an elder and they might not, and they live alone, they might not have the strength to do a huge cleaning. Is how thorough does your cleaning have to be?
So the cleaning, the primarily form of cleaning is making sure that there's no leavening in the homes. So as as it is per normal, most of us and even around the world do a thing called spring cleaning, where you clean everything. That includes, sweeping, mopping, wiping down, washing everything in the home, everything in the congregation. That's just become common practice. But when it comes to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's just a matter of making sure that there's no leavening in the home or the congregational building for those 7 days. And once again, that's just a matter of just throwing those things out. And so if someone's an elder and they don't have the strength to actually clean their entire house, and they're not able to get assistance in doing so, it's just a matter of making sure that they remove all of the things that contain those ingredients in it. And then if they don't have the strength to do that, getting somebody to help them at least do that. Just throw stuff out.
I ran out of questions to ask. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I ran out of questions. I don't know what else to ask. I just try to ask some of the common questions that people will have during this season. All of the things that people will be putting forward and try to add to the conversation things that people might not know. So in terms of, can we get like a list of the products? I think that's maybe the next thing that we might have to do. Get a list of products that we can use.
Yeah.
And kind of have pictures of it. Maybe have like a Amazon link for people,
Right.
so that they can
So
see.
they can order the stuff, right?
Yeah, they can order the stuff. especially with that Tom's and Maine toothpaste. What
Mhm.
about the Pilu toothpaste? Are they still around, that company?
I believe so.
All right,
I believe that they still are. I know that people just didn't like the taste.
right.
Um, but yeah, they're still around. Um, yeah, but it's not just. I know what was happening during that time. That was also a time amongst Israelites where, for lack of another better term, um, the discovery of health food stores,
Right.
came into play amongst Israel. So, in health food stores, even today, it's just easier to shop. It's just more expensive, but it's just easier to shop in a health food store
On a
because,
place like Whole Foods or something like that.
yeah, because you can pick up something and you can understand the ingredients that you're reading. So, like with the list that was posted earlier, and that's in the document, it's a lot of the biological or scientific terms for certain things. Whereas if you go to a health food store, as you just mentioned, some of the natural food stores such as Whole Foods and Fairway and um, stores like that, where you can pick up most items, at least maybe 70 to 80% of the items in that store, and read the ingredients and understand what you're reading. So at the time where the discovery of the health food store came to Israelites, things such as just getting pilu and certain things like that, which didn't have a good taste or a good smell for certain products, whether it's you can use it internally or externally, didn't taste good or smell good. It was just easier to just get that because for the 7 days, as opposed to having to do a whole research, especially at that time where you didn't have internet and things like that to aid in our research. It was just easy to walk in those stores, read the ingredients, and buy something that you can use for the 7 days and throw everything else out. So that's why they was on on um on one scale, there was just this mass throwing things out or trying to hide things because people were just unsure. And then on the flip side, there was just this, just taking in as much stuff from the health food store as possible. But now, with time and research, we have some sort of balance. And things such as the list of what to look out for, we make available. And then, we can also, as you just mentioned, make a list of things that you can use to help people during this time. But
What
yeah, it's
about
not about.
what about vegetarians who eat tofu and soy products? Um is that good during Pesach?
And it's in terms of just saying, speaking about Torah once again, it's not prohibited. But if you don't, if you're not there and turning that soybean into tofu or the soybean into the any type of thing that they make from it, then you want to stay away from it because you was not involved in that process. You was not in the factory where that process took place. And it definitely would be something that is clean because for the most part it is vegan. So based on Leviticus 11, those things are okay. But when it comes to Exodus 12 and 13, where if you're not privy to the process and you're not privy to what is in that factory, such as the leaven, which is also vegan, that can contaminate the tofu and things like that. The best thing to do is stay away from it during the season.
Is there a
Yeah,
question on the thing? I have an older
yeah.
son and I don't go in his room. He respect my life choice, but does not live it. Am I expected to clean his room as far as deodorants and so on?
So that's more of an involved question. It's sort of difficult to tell people how to or what to do within their homes, especially in the homes that are divided in terms of Torah practice and Torah understanding. So the answer we usually give for things like that, whether it's parent to child or child to parent, is do the best you can for what you can control in your own surroundings. So if the son is not living this way of life, and the best thing to do, or one of the best things to do, is to live by example. Um, the kitchen is under the control of the house, so everything in that kitchen would be cleaned out. So that would be the example that during these 7 days, there are certain things that are not supposed to be done. But once again, beyond that, you know, we do live in homes that have family members and friends of divided understandings. So it's always about, in those cases, doing the best you can. And remember that cutoff process is by eating anything leavened and not by someone else in another room having a product of loose leavening in it. It's about, us not ingesting leavening or leavened bread during the season.
And this sometimes is the difficulties when we have homes where people have different ways of living, or sometimes it's difficult because just as a reference, he might forget that it's Passover and bring a sandwich into the house or bring something into the
Yeah.
house, and those things can happen. So sometimes that's the difficulty of it. If someone is not living, especially during this season, they might be bringing something into the home that's not in accordance with the season.
And then, of course, things like that, you have to be extra careful if you have a shared kitchen with someone that's not living this, and they're gonna have yeast and different things all throughout the kitchen. Then you definitely have to be very careful on how you make your food.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do that extra cleaning of the pots and the pans or the grills or whatever you're using before and after. Especially if it's a situation where you do not control or you cannot control what others bring into the home, because you may be living in a shared environment,
Right.
whether it's family or friends. If you're living in
Right.
a shared environment, you have roommates, you have
Right.
housemates, things like that, and you're the only one, or there's a few of you that are doing this way of life and the others are just not. Then yeah, you just have to be more careful, especially in the kitchen. You definitely, that's where you want to have your own. I mean, you would want to have that anyway throughout the year, but that's where you definitely want to focus on having your own utensils, your own pots, pans, and stuff like that. But for to eat clean and to um, live clean throughout the year, you definitely want to have those things on your own anyway that nobody else is touching. So it just cause that extra step that you're using those utensils, pots and pans, and you wash it off, you clean it off, and as soon as it cools down and dries off, you want to make sure you package that stuff so that nobody else touch that at all. So because you don't want somebody taking your pan or your pot that you just washed and turned down. You went into your room or you went to work and you come back and they made something in it that you're not supposed to eat, and that's just year round.
Shalom, shalom, Ima Deborah B. So, any more questions in reference to Passover and anything that you may have not understood? Yes, Kaj Konek says Castle soap. I think that's the soap,
Mm-hmm.
the other soap.
The Castile.
Castile, right?
Castile.
Castile. Yeah. Castile soap. Those are natural things,
Right.
that you could use. What about in terms of lotions?
Yeah, I can't think of any companies off the top off the top. Um, yeah, I can't think of any off the top just like that. In general, and this is just personal experience. I've gotten into the past, I guess 2-3 years, just making my own lotion.
Mm.
So that's why I said, like, right now I can't even think of a company that I could say
Well, right now you got
yes
like
to.
the shea butter. You could use natural. You
Yeah.
got things like shea butter. You got coconut oil.
Well, right.
You got olive oil is good.
Yeah.
You got people that make lotions and or use these things as a base to
Yeah.
lotion your skin, right?
Yeah, because
And
that's what I've been personally doing. Like I said, at least 2 years, probably more. Shea butter, cocoa butter. As you mentioned, I also add the aloe vera, which I add
Right.
coconut oil. I mix it up together. The shea butter and the cocoa butter, when it softens up and you can actually mix everything together, once it becomes room temperature, the other things, the oils such as the olive oil, the aloe vera, and everything else, once it becomes room temperature, then it hardens to a base, but not becomes rock hard. But you could utilize that as actual lotion. So yeah, I just put a mix of oils together: argan oil, black seed oil, um, black castor oil, jojoba oil, if that's the proper way to pronounce it. Um, yeah, just mix a bunch of oils together, and then once again use the cocoa butter, shea butter, and coconut oil as well. When it gets to room temperature, it hardens as well. So those things help to solidify the consistency of those things. So those are things that we can do on our own for year round. Once again, just making our own lotions.
And also, if you could find lotions out there, sometimes there are people out there making natural lotions.
Yeah.
And they show you the ingredients. That's perfectly fine. If you could go to the store and find a lotion that doesn't have any of the ingredients that is shown in the list, that's
Hmm.
also fine. We're not trying to, over. I believe petroleum jelly is just that,
Yeah.
petroleum jelly. You could use that. Things of that nature. You could still, you could use.
And once you start getting into using these, during the 7 days, once again, these are things you could just use all year round, so that when the season comes again, there's less of a hassle. So, there are some things that, of course, we're going to reintroduce into our homes, the breads and stuff like that. But when it comes to other products, we can use certain products year round. Of course, when it comes to the toothpaste, you do want to use toothpaste throughout the year that has the baking soda because, it helps whiten better. So that way, those are the things you definitely want to remove for the 7 days. But when it comes to other things, there are things that we could use year round that makes this transitional process easy. But overall, if we were living in the land, the process of transition going into the feast of unleavened bread and coming right out is just very simple. It's just not eating leavened bread. So that's why when it mentions on the first day, leaven should be removed from the home, people look at the translation and said, well, shouldn't that be done before the first day? It's just a matter, using the word in the Hebrew just means to stop it. So it's basically something that you stop. Today we have to actually clean or remove, but then using that word in the Hebrew just means stop. So on the first day, you just stop, make sure that there's no leaven made, there's no sourdough at all from the first day to the seventh day. So the transition going in and out is very simple. Like once again, it's just today where we living and the lack of control of the things that we use because we have to buy certain things. It makes things a little bit more difficult. Well, actually, in some cases, a lot more difficult. But just focusing on the bread aspect and not eating leavened bread for the 7 days helps to make that transitional process easy.
What about elders or anyone that might need to take medication, maybe they're having kidneys, things with their kidneys, heart, whatever it may be? What's your suggestion in terms of that? You're talking about life and death
Mhm.
situations.
Yeah, for the most part, a lot of these medications do not have these products in them anyway. It's always good to check into it anyway, because the thing is, for medications, stuff such as yeast and those type of leavening agents could also cause inflammation in the body. So they would tend not to use those things within medications anyway. But it's always good to do the research just to make sure. But for the most part, these ingredients are not in medications. Now, when it comes to vitamins or supplements, then which are the things that are not life threatening if you don't take it. Some of them, if you just buy them, randomly in your GNCs and your regular stores, they may have yeast in them. Just like some of them may have gelatin in them. But you go to some or focus more on the health food stores, things like that, you can get your vitamins that do not contain yeast and the other products. But at the same time, once again, when it comes to vitamins and supplements, you're not there for the process. So going back to the list and just to make, clarify that point and just to encapsulate everything, going to the list, once again, that was posted and that's in the document. Those are the things that you absolutely have to remove from your home. If there's a question about anything else in your home that does not contain the ingredients that's on the list, just don't use it for the 7 days. So that, once again, the transition going in and out is not very difficult. So once again, things that are questionable to you and don't contain the items on that list, but you don't feel comfortable using it, just don't use it. So going back to the medications, once again, medications tend not to use things that inflame the body. So pretty much people are safe with medications, with most medications, when it comes to leavening during this time of year. Now, in terms of unclean stuff in it, that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, there are still ingredients on the packaging. There are still data sheets for the medications that people can still read through. So you're pretty much safe with the medications. It's the vitamins that you just have to be, or definitely have to be careful of.
Someone wanted to know about the cars and cleaning the cars.
Yes, do that also. Anything within your possession, do that also. Make sure that there's none of those crumbs, those breadcrumbs, those cracker crumbs, those cookie crumbs, and anything that is with your borders. Some people might put leavening in their cars and say, well, I'm not driving the car for the 7 days, but that's still your possession. Or you have a storage unit and things like that. You want to clean everything that is your possession. Your borders is your possession.
And as far as the list, I'm gonna as soon as this is over, I'm gonna put a link to the list at the bottom of this video in the descriptions, so that way everybody will be able to connect and be able to have the list, a copy of the list for themselves personally.
And then just as a side note, I see I was going to say you, but I guess we have competition. DJ AK Gold. I guess we got to have some sort of sound clash or something someday. Got more DJs popping up in Israel.
Yes, sir. So
yeah, I don't know where he's based, but I just noticed the name.
He say he's Lebanese.
Oh, that's the one. That's the one from
Yeah.
Lebanon. Okay. Well, he didn't say where he was living. I know he said he's from
Right.
Lebanon, but he didn't say where he's living. But yeah, just shout out to DJ AK Gold. Got another DJ in Israel.
Mm-hmm. You gotta send us those tracks from them rap artists in Israel, I guess. Okay. It doesn't seem like there's many more questions. I guess if you have any more questions, you could reach out to us at info@beitdcb.org. That's info@beitdcb.org. Or you could reach out to us at 347-622-9090, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. We're going to also try to have pictures of the products that you could buy to make it a little bit easier for you. And I don't know, I guess if we have time in the afternoon on Shabbat, we also would try to go into another question and answer period.
Yeah.
For everyone. And I don't know if you want to do this again sometime next week or if this is enough, just in case people have more questions.
Yeah, we'll see what other questions people have. Whether it's on YouTube or you can post the video on Facebook and see what questions come under that.
Yeah, the video is already on Facebook. It's streaming live on Facebook right now. I just have to tag you on it.
All right. So I'm not opposed to another session, next week. If but we definitely, we want to focus on the questions. So, as we mentioned earlier, we just want to make sure that we get this right. And some of the things that we teach are specific to the congregation, to this congregation, and we try to get as close to Torah as possible. So without adding a lot of the things that, some communities may add as prohibitions, and at the same time, taking precautions and not taking away too much from the things that are allowed as well.
Hallelujah. So if no one else has any more questions, I'd like to thank Rabbi Chief Binyamin for his time this evening. Praying that the Creator of heaven and earth be with each and every one of you. I pray that everyone has a great evening, a great night, and we'll be seeing each other once again, Yah willing. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom to everybody. Praise the Most High.
Hallelujah.